Inside the mountain America was never supposed to reach, the Fordow secret. How deep would you bury a secret if you believed the entire world was trying to find it? Now imagine that secret is not a briefcase or a hard drive. It is an underground factory, carved into a ridge of solid granite, guarded by air defenses and buried far enough that its owners genuinely believed no bomb on Earth could reach it. For more than a decade, that belief held. And then, in a matter of minutes, it didn't. If you're enjoying this analysis, don't forget to subscribe to Cartovex Media, because the next few minutes completely change the picture. At 2:10 in the morning, according to accounts released after the strike, men working beneath a ridge in northern Iran heard alarms that were never meant to be background noise. They were not listening to another drill. They were listening to rock being struck from above again and again in a rhythm that felt deliberate rather than random. Somewhere over the mountain, aircraft they could not see, and in some cases could not even hear, had released weapons engineered for a single purpose: to turn depth itself into a trap. For years, the engineers who designed that underground complex trusted granite as a shield. They believed that enough stone, enough concrete, and enough distance from the surface could make a nuclear facility effectively untouchable. The United States reached a very different conclusion. Granite could slow a weapon down. It could shatter older, weaker bombs on impact. But if you studied a mountain long enough and built a weapon specifically around its weakest points, that same rock could be turned against the people hiding inside it. That is the real story here. It is not only a story about a giant bomb, it is a story about patience. One country spent years hiding machines inside a mountain. Another country spent more than a decade asking a single cold question: where is the weak spot? Every tunnel needs air. Every underground factory needs power. Every deep room needs a way for people, heat, cables, and equipment to move in and out. A mountain can cover a facility. It cannot make that facility disappear. That small, almost boring truth quietly shaped one of the most intense target studies of the modern era, years before any pilot knew he might one day fly toward Iran, carrying the heaviest conventional bomb America had ever built. But to understand why this particular mountain mattered so much, you have to go back to the fear that produced it in the first place. Iran's nuclear story did not begin as a hidden military race. In the 1950s, under the Shah, the program grew with direct help from the United States, part of an old Cold War dream that nuclear energy could make allied nations modern, wealthy, and respected. Then came 1979. Revolution, a brutal war with Iraq, deep isolation.
Sanctions that never seemed to end. Inside Iran's new leadership, a belief hardened. The outside world wanted the country weak, and self-reliance, including nuclear self-reliance, was the only real form of protection. By the 1990s and early 2000s, inspectors and intelligence agencies were already asking hard questions about sites like Natanz, where long rows of centrifuges could enrich uranium far beyond civilian needs. Iran insisted the program was peaceful. Its rivals feared it was quietly building the option to produce a weapon. But the real turning point came from above, not from any inspector on the ground. Satellites noticed something strange near the holy city of Qom. Roads appeared where roads didn't seem to matter. Earth was moved in patterns that looked less like ordinary construction and more like a careful wound cut into the side of a ridge. By 2009, the secret could not stay buried any longer. The United States, Britain, and France announced publicly that Iran had been constructing a second enrichment plant inside a mountain. This was Fordow. Unlike Natanz, Fordow was not laid out across an open desert, where a single jet or missile could strike it directly. It was tucked under rock, wrapped in air defenses, and protected by one powerful assumption: that no conventional weapon could ever reach it. Fordow was small compared to some industrial complexes, but its meaning was enormous. You do not bury delicate enrichment machinery under hundreds of feet of stone because it's convenient. You do it because you're already expecting trouble.
Centrifuges are not stacks of steel pipe. They are precision instruments spinning at extreme speeds, balanced so finely that even a tiny disturbance can destroy them. A power surge, a vibration, a pressure wave, a slight shift in the floor beneath them. Any one of those can turn a whole of working machines into scrap metal in seconds. So Iran's engineering choice became obvious. If the machines themselves cannot be made tougher, the mountain around them had to be. Fordow, in other words, was never just a facility. It was an answer to air power itself. And for a while, that answer worked. America's older bunker-busting weapons had earned a fearsome reputation in earlier conflicts, but they were designed for buried command posts and hardened shelters, not for a precision nuclear workshop wrapped in granite.
The GBU-28, famous for punching through hardened targets, weighed roughly 5,000 pounds. Against Fordow's depth, that was not nearly enough. But here's what almost nobody outside the program understood at the time. The challenge was never simply building a louder explosion. If a bomb shatters on impact, it becomes a surface blast and wastes almost all of its force in the wrong place. If it detonates too early, the same problem occurs. If it drifts even slightly off its intended path, it can miss the one corridor that actually matters and leave the most important rooms completely untouched. The real challenge was building a weapon that could survive the violence of penetration long enough to reach the correct depth before it did anything at all. That need eventually produced the GBU-57, better known publicly as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. The name sounds almost crude, the weapon is not. It is more than 20 feet long and weighs around 30,000 pounds. Its thick steel casing is built to strike earth and rock at tremendous speed while staying in one piece, continuing to drive forward and waiting for precisely the right moment to function. Inside is a large explosive charge, but the smartest part of the weapon is not the explosive at all. It is the fuse, the guidance system, and the modeling behind it. In effect, the weapon has to know where it is. It has to distinguish between initial impact and true penetration, between open space and solid resistance, and it has to fire only when the blast can achieve the most damage possible. Yet even that remarkable engineering was only half of the equation. The other half was knowledge. For years, analysts studied Fordow purely from the outside. They tracked roads and tunnel mouths, they watched cooling systems, power lines, and the piles of excavated rock left behind during construction. They searched for the shape of underground rooms by reading small, almost invisible clues on the surface. A new structure here, a new vent there, a subtle change in the slope after a fresh tunnel was cut. This kind of work is slow, quiet, and almost invisible by design. Nobody makes a blockbuster film about analysts comparing satellite photographs for 15 years straight. But that patient, unglamorous work can decide whether a billion-dollar mission strikes solid rock or finds the one path the original designers forgot to protect. Fordow's most important weaknesses were never the giant blast doors people imagine. They were the ventilation shafts. Every deep facility needs them. Without airflow, heat builds up, workers suffer, and delicate machinery fails. The irony is sharp. The very openings that allow a mountain bunker to breathe are the same openings that can help an adversary attack it. Iranian engineers understood this risk, especially as war began to feel closer. In the days before the reported American strike, satellite images showed a burst of activity around the complex. Trucks moving in and out, entrances suddenly busy, protective caps appearing over exposed shafts. To an outside observer, it looked as though Iran was scrambling to protect the last soft points in the mountain. But if American planners had already spent years quietly measuring exactly those points, then last-minute concrete was never a surprise. It was simply another expected layer in a plan that had already been written. The delivery problem was just as difficult as the weapon itself. The Massive Ordnance Penetrator is far too heavy for ordinary aircraft. Only the B-2 Spirit, the bat-winged stealth bomber first designed during the Cold War, can carry it into combat, and only internally, because external weapons would destroy the aircraft's stealth profile. Each B-2 can carry 2 of these bombs. There are only a small number of B-2s in existence. Every hour of flight requires refueling tankers, maintenance crews, precise route planning, and constant weather monitoring. Rescue contingencies and electronic support are essential as well. A mission from the continental United States to Iran is not a single aircraft slipping through the dark like a movie hero. It is a moving system spread across continents, fuel waiting in the sky, and pilots flying through a night rehearsed for years before it ever happened. Quick pause here. If this story is holding your attention, tap like so more people see a serious breakdown instead of another shouting headline, and subscribe if you want the next investigation the moment it drops. When later reports describe what officials called Operation Midnight Hammer, the most impressive part was never just the explosion, it was the choreography. Stealth bombers, refueling tankers strung across oceans, fighters clearing airspace ahead of the strike package, submarines reportedly positioned to fire cruise missiles, decoy formations moving in the opposite direction to pull attention away from the real force. Public radar and public attention were drawn toward one flight path, while the actual strike package moved quietly along another. The goal, on paper, sounded almost simple. Strike Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan within a tight window, damage the core of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, and withdraw before Iran could organize a meaningful response. But the deeper message was not simply that America possessed a devastating weapon. The message was that America had built an entire system capable of using it precisely at the moment of its choosing. That distinction matters enormously. A bomb sitting in a hangar is a threat. A bomb connected to stealth aircraft, satellite intelligence, refueling logistics, exact timing, and political will becomes something else entirely, a decision. And for more than a decade, Fordow had forced that decision onto the table without anyone actually wanting to make it. Diplomats tried agreements instead. Sanctions tightened around Iran's economy. Inspectors counted centrifuges and checked seals. And yet the shadow of that mountain never fully left the negotiating table. The tension underneath all of this was never purely military. It was moral and political as well. If Iran could enrich uranium deep underground with little real fear of attack, its leadership would gain enormous leverage in every future negotiation. But if the United States struck first, it risked igniting a much wider war, rallying Iranian society around a government it might otherwise resent, and setting a precedent future presidents could later feel pressured to repeat elsewhere. Israel, meanwhile, watched with an entirely different fear. Israeli officials believed a nuclear-armed Iran would permanently reshape the balance of power across the Middle East. Yet Israel lacked the exact combination of long-range stealth aircraft, the specific bomb, and the refueling capacity required to strike Fordow directly. So the hardest target of the entire dispute became a question only Washington could ultimately answer. By the mid-2020s, the situation had grown noticeably more dangerous. The earlier nuclear agreement had slowed parts of Iran's program, but it had also become a bitter domestic political battlefield in the United States. Washington withdrew from the deal under President Trump in 2018. Iran, in turn, gradually rolled back its own self-imposed limits and increased enrichment levels. International inspectors continued reporting growing concern. Uranium enriched to around 60% is not, by itself, a finished nuclear weapon, but it sits far beyond anything a normal civilian power reactor requires, and it dramatically shortens the remaining road to weapons-grade material. That is why every new stockpile figure felt heavier than the last. It was never just a number on a report. It was time, quietly running out. Then came the wider clash between Israel and Iran. After days of strikes across Iranian territory, reports indicated that many surface-level defenses and conventional military sites had already been damaged. But Fordow remained the one problem nobody else could solve. The site wasn't dangerous because it was enormous. It was dangerous because it was protected by geology itself, and that is an entirely different kind of shield. Radar can be jammed, missiles can be intercepted mid-flight, concrete can be cracked open with enough force, but a mountain cannot simply be switched off. It sits there, heavy and silent, daring an attacker to waste its most advanced weapons against unyielding stone. That is precisely why the strike focused on the entrances the mountain could not live without. The first weapons reportedly struck protective caps and surface fortifications, forcing open a path. Follow-on bombs were then aimed into those same narrow openings, using different depth settings calibrated for what lay beneath. This was not the old idea of dropping a single bomb and hoping the blast was large enough. It was closer to driving a series of steel fists through the exact same wound, each one reaching slightly deeper, each one timed to make the next detonation more effective than the last. Here is the strange physics almost nobody outside military engineering fully grasps. A bunker-busting weapon does not need to vaporize every single room to ruin an entire facility. Deep underground, blast waves behave very differently than they do in open air. In open air, pressure spreads outward and fades quickly. Inside solid rock, shock energy travels through stone, concrete, steel, and empty chambers alike. It finds corners, it hammers walls. It turns solid floors into rippling waves of force. If several detonations occur at carefully planned depths, those pressure pulses can overlap and place enormous stress on the entire structure. Even if a chamber does not physically collapse, the precision machines inside it may already be finished. Centrifuges are built for speed, not punishment. They can be destroyed by vibration, misalignment, sudden power loss, or contamination. You do not need to melt them into slag, you only need to make them unable to spin. That is why a mountain can ultimately betray the very people sheltering inside it. The deeper a room sits, the more protected it normally is from ordinary bombs. But once a weapon reaches the correct internal path, all of that surrounding mass becomes a conductor of force. Rock that once acted as armor becomes a hammer. Concrete that once offered comfort becomes a surface for pressure to travel across. The engineers who designed Fordow were not foolish people. They understood modern air power. They knew Israel had struck nuclear reactors before, in other countries, decades earlier. They understood that the United States had spent decades refining precision strike capability. If they made any single mistake, it was believing the contest would freeze in place once the mountain was sealed. They built their defense against the weapons they already knew existed. Their adversary spent the next decade building a weapon designed specifically around the mountain they had made. The first public reports after the strike sounded almost absolute. Officials used words like severe damage, even obliteration. Satellite images showed fresh craters along the ridgeline, disturbed earth, blocked tunnel entrances, and signs that the ground above parts of the complex had visibly shifted. To many casual viewers watching the news that week, the story felt finished. The mountain had been hit. The weapon had worked exactly as designed. The great hidden site was gone. But real wars almost never end with one clean, tidy picture. Battle damage assessment is painfully slow, especially when the target sits underground. The enemy still controls the site, and the most important physical evidence is buried behind shattered tunnels no outsider can safely enter. Then came the doubts. Leaked early intelligence assessments, described publicly as low confidence, reportedly suggested the strikes may have delayed Iran's program by months rather than years. Other officials pushed back hard, insisting the damage was far more serious and long-lasting. Independent experts warned that both sides had strong incentives to speak in extremes. Governments prefer victory to sound total, while adversaries prefer survival to sound complete. The truth, as usual, hides somewhere in between. A bomb can collapse tunnels and destroy delicate machinery. It cannot erase knowledge from the minds of the engineers who built the program in the first place. It cannot guarantee that every gram of enriched uranium was actually still inside the mountain the moment the first weapon arrived. And if material had been quietly moved before the strike, then a genuine military success becomes only one part of a much larger, unresolved question. This is the uncomfortable truth underneath every modern nuclear program. They are never just buildings. They are networks, mines, conversion plants, enrichment halls, storage locations, trained scientists, supply chains, computer systems, secret workshops, and political decisions layered on top of one another. Destroying a single site, even a legendary one, can matter enormously, especially when that site is genuinely unique. But it does not erase an entire nation's technical understanding of how enrichment works. It does not remove every tool from the toolbox. It may buy real time. It may reshape political calculations. It may frighten leaders into caution or convince them to dig even deeper next time. That is precisely why the word setback carries more honesty than the word ending. A setback can be powerful, even historically important. It is simply not the same thing as peace. And still, the symbolism of that single night was enormous. For decades, powerful states have buried command centers, missile silos, and research facilities beneath mountains. North Korea does it today. China studies the concept closely. Russia has built extensive underground complexes of its own. Iran was simply part of that same tradition. The underlying logic is simple. If an enemy controls the sky, go under the earth instead. But the Fordow strike, as widely reported, sent a warning to every military planner who trusts that logic a little too completely. Depth is not magic. Granite is not a permanent promise. A bunker is only ever as safe as its least protected connection to the surface. A ventilation shaft, a cable route, a drainage tunnel, a service road, an overlooked pattern in the surrounding dirt. One forgotten detail can decide an entire campaign. And that is what makes this particular American response more dangerous than an ordinary bunker-busting weapon. A normal bunker buster is simply a weapon. This was a method. It combined patient, years-long intelligence gathering, custom engineering, stealth delivery, precise political timing, and a clear psychological message. The message, roughly translated, said, "If you build a fortress, we will spend years quietly learning its habits. If you seal one entrance, we will study what that decision tells us about the room behind it. If you dig deeper, we will not simply build a bigger explosion, we will build a smarter path to reach you anyway." The frightening part was never that the bomb was heavy. The frightening part is that the entire program was designed around a very specific idea of human confidence, the quiet belief that eventually someone else will simply stop looking. That belief has appeared again and again throughout military history. Castles were trusted until cannons rewrote the rules of siege warfare. Battleships were heavily armored until aircraft rewrote the rules of naval combat. Fixed missile silos were hardened until precision guidance rewrote the rules of deterrence. Every defense quietly creates its own race. At first, the wall wins. Then the attacker studies the wall, builds new tools, trains new crews, and waits patiently for the day the wall finally becomes nothing more than a map. Fordow was, in every real sense, a modern castle carved beneath a mountain, built for a world where older bombs simply couldn't reach it. But technology never stopped advancing after 2009, and neither did fear. There is also a human dimension to all of this that is easy to overlook entirely. Somewhere, Iranian engineers designed those underground halls genuinely believing they were protecting their country's future. Somewhere else, American engineers designed a bomb specifically to break that protection apart. On both sides of this story, real people went home at night, raised families, and quietly worked on calculations whose eventual results could shake an actual mountain. The machines involved may be cold steel and concrete, but the motives behind them never were. Pride, fear, memory, revenge, survival, and deterrence, all of it is mixed permanently into the metal. Before we move into the aftermath, do one small thing for the channel. Hit like as if you're marking a location on a map, subscribe if you want more stories built carefully on verified facts rather than noise, and send this to someone who needs the honest, complicated version of a story the headlines usually flatten. The aftermath raises a question no single documentary can fully answer. Did the strike genuinely make the world safer, or did it simply teach Iran and every other watching government to hide more effectively next time? Supporters of the operation argued that waiting indefinitely would have been far more dangerous. They insisted that a decisive strike proved red lines still carried real consequences, and that Fordow could never be allowed to become a permanent shelter for a potential nuclear breakout. Critics saw a very different danger entirely. They warned that using force without a clear, long-term political plan can quietly convert a temporary delay into a permanent grievance. If a government survives a blow like this, it may rebuild with fewer international inspectors watching, deeper tunnels protecting it, and a far stronger domestic argument that only an actual nuclear weapon can guarantee its survival going forward. That is the paradox sitting at the heart of all bunker warfare. The more convincingly you prove that bunkers can be destroyed, the more some leaders may conclude they need weapons that genuinely cannot be. The strike may weaken a program in the short term, but the lesson absorbed by the target might simply become, disperse it, move it, hide it beneath cities instead of mountains, rush the timeline before the next attack arrives. This does not mean force never works as a tool of policy. It means force works best only when tied to a clear and coherent political objective. Bombs can open a door. They cannot decide what ultimately walks through it afterward. For the United States, the entire mission also functioned as a demonstration aimed at both allies and rivals watching closely from around the world. To allies, it signaled that America still possesses genuine global reach, the ability to launch from home soil, cross oceans undetected, coordinate seamlessly with regional partners, and strike targets that few other nations could ever attempt. But there was a quieter message buried underneath that one, and it may be even more important in the long run. The true advantage on display was never simply metal or high explosives. It was the sustained ability to focus an entire national security apparatus on a single, narrow problem for well over a decade. Universities, government laboratories, pilots, intelligence officers, satellite operators, software engineers, and senior commanders all touched this single outcome in some way. That is why the mountain was ultimately facing something larger than any single bomb. It was facing the organized, patient attention of an entire technological civilization. For Iran, the lesson landed very differently and far more painfully. The very qualities that made Fordow legendary, its fame, its hardened protection, its central place in years of nuclear diplomacy, eventually became its curse. Because the site was so famous, so heavily reinforced, and so politically central to the dispute, it attracted more than a decade of continuous outside study. Secrecy did not protect it forever. Depth did not remove it from the target list. Instead, the mountain slowly became a fixed point around which American planning could patiently orbit, year after year. Every month that passed handed analysts more satellite images, more behavioral patterns, more opportunities to refine their models of exactly what lay beneath the surface. A moving target is genuinely hard to strike. A buried target is difficult to physically reach. But a buried target that cannot move at all gives a sufficiently patient adversary something quite rare, enough time to fully understand it. Most casual viewers will remember the huge bomb because enormous weapons are simple to picture in your mind. A 30,000-pound weapon creates a clean, dramatic image. But the more accurate picture of this entire story looks different. Picture a room full of analysts staring at satellite photographs for years until one faint shadow finally makes sense. Picture engineers repeatedly testing steel casings against solid rock samples. Picture programmers modeling shockwaves through underground chambers they have never physically seen. Picture pilots training for years to cross half the planet without ever being detected. Picture decision-makers staring silently at options where every available choice carries genuine risk. That combination is the real machine behind the machine. The bomb itself falls for only a matter of seconds. The preparation behind it lasted for years. And yet, even after all of that preparation, meaningful uncertainty remains. No outside observer can know exactly which tunnels fully collapsed. No satellite can see every stored cylinder that may or may not have still been inside. No official statement from any government involved should ever be treated as a perfectly clear window into what actually happened underground. This is why serious, careful analysis has to hold two thoughts simultaneously. The strike may genuinely have been a major technical success, proving that even the most symbolic parts of Iran's nuclear program were not permanently beyond reach. And the strike may still have left enough people, material, and anger intact for this particular story to continue evolving for years. In geopolitics, both of those things can absolutely be true at once. The most dangerous mistake anyone could make here would be turning this entire story into a simple cartoon. It is not brave pilots against evil scientists. It is not innocent engineers against reckless generals. It is a genuine collision of security fears, national ambition, international law, historical memory, and raw power. Iran exists in a region where outside powers have invaded, bombed, and sanctioned it repeatedly across generations, and its leadership uses that painful history to justify both secrecy and open defiance. Israel lives permanently with the fear that a single nuclear breakthrough next door could threaten its very survival as a state. The United States carries both the burden and the quiet arrogance of being the only power on Earth with tools large enough to reach across an ocean and reshape this particular outcome by force. Each side sincerely believes it is preventing disaster. That belief, more than any weapon, is exactly what makes disaster so difficult to fully avoid. So, in the end, what did the granite actually stop? It stopped easy answers. It stopped smaller weapons from ever being sufficient. It stopped quick, simple plans. It forced the United States to build a heavier bomb, a smarter fuse, a longer and more complicated mission, and a far deeper, more patient intelligence effort than almost anyone outside the program ever fully appreciated. But it did not stop attention. It did not stop engineers from doing their work. It did not stop the slow, careful mathematics of a determined nation trying to prove that no fortress is ever truly final. That may be the single most important military lesson buried inside the entire Fordow story. The future of warfare is not only about raw firepower. It is about locating the exact place where confidence quietly becomes weakness. But the political lesson underneath all of it is far darker. If every bunker can eventually be reached, then every state that feels hunted may go looking for an entirely different kind of protection instead. It may scatter its program across multiple hidden locations.
It may choose to hide critical infrastructure among civilian populations. It may race toward completion faster than before. Or, in rarer cases, it may finally choose to negotiate seriously, not because genuine trust has grown, but because the practical price of hiding has simply become too high to bear. None of these possible paths is simple, and none of them is guaranteed. A single bomb can absolutely change a nation's calculations. It cannot by itself create lasting trust between adversaries. Trust comes only from verification, sustained pressure, mutual restraint, and time. Those tools are far less dramatic than a stealth bomber crossing an ocean in complete silence, but ultimately, they are what decides whether the next hidden mountain ever has to be attacked at all. Think once more about the people working underground in those first chaotic minutes. They likely did not know the exact name of the weapon falling above them. They did not know that analysts had studied their ventilation shafts for more than a decade. They had no way of knowing that pilots had crossed oceans in complete silence to reach them, or that powerful computers somewhere had modeled the exact shockwave now traveling through their walls. They only knew in that instant that the impossible was suddenly no longer impossible. That feeling, more than any single crater, is the true end of the granite myth. A nation can pour endless concrete, cut tunnel after tunnel, and stack an entire mountain over its most closely guarded secrets. But once an adversary decides that secret matters enough to spend years pursuing it, the hiding place stops being a shield. It becomes a challenge. That is why Fordow will ultimately be remembered for far more than the craters left behind on satellite images. It proved that the ancient contest between hiding and finding is not finished, but it has fundamentally changed shape. The mountain still matters. Depth still buys real time. Granite still makes any attack significantly harder. But harder was never the same thing as safe. Somewhere tonight, another government is already sketching new tunnels on a map. Somewhere, another analyst is already quietly measuring shadows in a fresh satellite image. And somewhere, another engineer is already asking how to design the next weapon for the next impossible target. Iran trusted its mountain to end the question permanently. The strike instead proved that the question was only getting deeper. Every fortress carries a hidden weakness. The future belongs to whoever finds it first.